Welcome to An Honorable Profession, a podcast giving America hope since 2018. I'm Ryan Coonerty. Along with Debbie Cox Bultan of the New Deal, I'm lucky enough to be your co-host. An Honorable Profession is a New Deal Leaders podcast. The New Deal is an organization that supports the next generation of American leaders. From attorneys generals to state senators to mayors to school board members, these are the people that are pushing policies and politics that will respond to climate change, rebuild our economy, address racial injustice, and restore our democracy. These are incredibly talented people who have dedicated themselves to public service when their country and their communities needed it the most. Check out newdealleaders.org to see what I'm talking about.
In today's very special 300th episode, Ryan and I are delighted to be joined by former Secretary Pete Buttigieg to help us celebrate this important milestone and to talk about where we are as a party and a country and where we go from here. This is a particularly special and full circle moment. As a young, smart, effective, but relatively unknown New Deal leader, then Mayor Pete Buttigieg joined us for just episode 5 of this podcast back in 2018. Over 300 episodes, we've been so proud to provide a platform to showcase current and future leaders, governors, senators, members of Congress, attorneys general, secretaries of state, legislative leaders, mayors, and many more. The goal of our podcast and our broader work at New Deal over the past 15 years has been to support and uplift exceptional state and local leaders who are winning elections, delivering results, and are the future of our party and our country. And we're just getting started. New Deal leaders are providing a roadmap for Democrats moving forward. Thank you for being part of this journey. And if you're new to our community, I hope you'll subscribe to this podcast, learn more at our Substack, The Roadmap, or on our website, newdealleaders.org. Happy 300th, and we look forward to introducing you to many more exceptional leaders who will continue to bring hope in these crazy times. Special guest today, Pete Buttigieg. Welcome to An Honorable Profession.
It's great seeing you. Thanks for having me.
It's really great to see you and really special to have you here. As you know, this is our 300th episode of An Honorable Profession, as well as our 15th anniversary of New Deal. So this is a big moment for New Deal, and really happy to have you here, of course. I think back of when we first met in 2012, when you joined New Deal as a pretty new mayor of South Bend, Indiana, doing some very exciting things on smart sewers and all kinds of cool stuff. And, loved having you be part of this amazing national network of leaders who are sharing ideas and getting stuff done. And we fast forward to today, and now we've got 3 governors who are come through New Deal and 18 members of Congress. And obviously just a really important job we're so grateful to still be playing and supporting elected officials at state and local level all over this country who are helping guide us through these crazy times. So really appreciate you taking your time to be here today while we celebrate these big milestones.
Well, thanks. It's I still remember that first New Deal meeting I participated in so well, and it doesn't feel like it could have been that long ago. But I guess that's what happens. Time keeps progressing.
I look in the mirror and I go, yeah, it's been that long. But I hear you. Ryan.
Yeah, Pete, I wanted to ask you because, you and I were much younger mayors back in these days, and you're quiet, earnest leader leading your city, talking about sewers and other things. And I just think about the journey you've been on for the past 7 years. Can you talk a little bit about what you've learned about American politics, about leadership, as you've stepped into all these different roles, and our country has gone through some dramatic tests during that time as well?
So much has changed, but really all of the experiences since then, running for president, serving in the cabinet, becoming a private citizen as I am now, and kind of enjoying that. But through all of that, I find that I'm constantly returning to the mentality of a mayor, a young mayor in a Midwestern city that was struggling to find its future. And I think a lot of the lessons from those 2 terms really are at the heart of how I try to practice politics now. I think even now with these enormous, sometimes cosmic things happening to our society, to our politics, to our government, to our country, some of the attention to the very basics of life and the focus on the everyday that I think is required of anybody trying to do a good job in local government are even more deserving of being our North Star at a moment like this. I see so many things that have gone wrong in our country because people don't feel like they're getting results on a day-to-day basis. And they are even open to leaders who've done things that I consider to be disqualifying because they're willing to try anything that might lead to better results. And so I think the experience of a mayor, in my city, had a lot to do with modernizing basic services, had a lot to do with making sure that just simple things like sewer and trash pickup were on track, but also had to do with a story about what kind of city we were. And I think about that right now as, national Republicans are offering a story that I think is a pretty frightening one because it's about exclusion. But in order to compete, we need to have a different story. Back in South Bend, it was not make South Bend great again. It was look to the future and make that future work for us. And I think we have a chance to do something similarly at a national level. And the sooner we can reframe our thinking that way, the better off we're going to be.
You talked a little bit about this or alluded to it, but we are going through so much right now, right? There's so much being thrown at us every day. It's hard to navigate. Those state and local leaders are still trying to do what you are talking about, which is actually to just deliver results for their constituents. And I think we'll come back and talk about, what that means for the National Democratic Party. But for those state and local leaders who are kind of trying to navigate how to continue to make progress, protect their citizens, protect democracy, what's your advice to people who are kind of on the front lines of all of this right now?
Well, I really continue to think in a moment like this, our salvation will come from the local. And that doesn't mean that every local leader should be rogering up to weigh in on national or international issues that have little to do with their day job. But it does mean that they're ready to stand up when their day job is getting harder because of the conduct of this administration. And so I think in between the idea of jumping for the barricades of the resistance, even if it's got nothing to do with your job, on one end of the extreme, one extreme of the spectrum. And the other end, which I think also is a mistake, which is to desperately try to keep your head down, hoping the administration won't notice you, which I think we've learned, corporations, universities, a whole bunch of entities have learned that sooner or later, trying to accommodate that way will still catch up to you. In between those, I think is a chance to take principled stands on issues that matter in the name of the job you're trying to do for your constituents. And just to make it a little concrete, one of the clearest examples of that right now is around safety. One of the core jobs of a mayor is to keep their city safe. Mayors are doing remarkable work right now with local law enforcement, mental health partnerships, housing, and other measures to make their communities more safe. Just this week, I was in Denver, which has experienced a remarkable drop in people sleeping on the streets, and also a remarkable drop in violent crime. I was in San Francisco, which has had a long struggle that's well known, but also right now is on track to see potentially their lowest homicide rate since the 1950s. Mayors are leading the way on how to get that done, even as the president claims falsely that the reason he's deploying the military into the streets of American communities has to do with safety. I think mayors are in a position to say, hey, if you want to help us out from Washington with safety, great. Take the cost of deploying, let's say, one guardsman, and you could put that in local hands, and we could use that to hire probably 2 or 3 police officers and mental health professionals. And so there's different and better answers available. And I think a chance for mayors to speak to that, not at the expense of the work they're doing every day, but as part of it.
Yeah. And I want to ask a follow-up question to that, which is, I think there's a big conversation right now, which you're talking about a little bit or touching on, which is, what does it mean to fight as Democrats? Right. And there's, are we just going to be louder, or are we going to, when do you stand up? You're kind of talking about when that is. How do you define that? What does it mean? And I'm sure it matters who you are, who you're talking to, but for you, what does it mean to fight in this time?
Well, I think it's taking a stand for what's right. I think it's using leverage and power when you have it. And that's why I think it's important that in Washington, Democrats right now are taking a stand to make sure that people can afford their health care at a moment when letters are going out as we speak telling people that Trump has increased their health insurance premiums, even if it doesn't use the president's name. That's clearly what's happened. And there's a chance to change that. That's an example of fighting that shows people not just what we're fighting against, but what we're fighting for. And I think that's the most important part of it. It's not fighting for its own sake. It's not opposition without some kind of principle behind it. It's opposition because we know what the American people could have if we had better leadership. And what we could have if we had better leadership is more affordable health care and things like paid family leave, which we would have right now as a country if Republicans hadn't stopped us. And we could have cleaner air and cleaner water and safer streets and so many other things. So I think fighting has to have those two sides to it. Yes, we all know what we're up against, but people are only going to be able to hear us if we make it clear what it is that we're standing for.
Yeah.
I want to talk about having people hear us because you've been a master communicator in pushing out an agenda and in talking to all sides of the political spectrum. I think a lot of people are keeping their head down, business leaders, elected officials and beyond, in part to stay off the president's radar, but in part because they're afraid of the backlash of soundbite being weaponized against them. Any advice for communicating in this new world, a highly polarized, algorithm, attention-driven world?
Well, I think more than ever, it's critical not to be preaching to the choir, but to actually be penetrating the walls of the silos that the algorithm sorts us into. It's a digital version of what I've been doing for a long time, going out to places like Fox News. But now we've got to be in spaces that are more conservative and spaces that are less political. The truth is, a lot of people get their information, including their political information, from podcasts and shows that don't present themselves as political programming. I mean, I would even say that's true of Rogan, but it's definitely true of a lot of other places on Instagram and in podcast world, where you might be scanning for content as a young parent, but starting to see Maha stuff infiltrating your feed. You might be looking at sports content. Next thing you know, you're seeing kind of anti-DEI, anti-woke stuff starting to come in there. So we got to be smart about competing on that terrain. We also have to recognize that the definition of long form has changed. I remember when long form meant a 45-minute NPR interview. Now it's a 3-hour-long podcast. It is impossible as a matter of stamina to stay on talking points for 3 hours, even if you tried. So don't try. And my advice to Democrats is you should go into those spaces. You should go in knowing that in the course of 3 hours, you're probably going to step on a landmine or two. And that's okay, because what's more important is that people understand your core, who you are, what you're like, especially at a moment when too many Americans see Democrats only by means of a caricature and a portrayal that isn't who we actually are.
So this brings us to, we have elections in a couple states in a couple weeks, but we have huge consequential elections next year. What messages do you see that are resonating out there as we head into 2026? And what and maybe even what messages aren't resonating and we should be avoiding?
Well, I certainly think a laser focus on affordability is really important right now. And it is something that a lot of the successful candidates I see, some of whom are more left-leaning and some of whom are more moderate within the Democratic big tent, the most successful ones, I think, have really zeroed in on that. It's things that for a long time we've been talking about, like healthcare, which is at stake in a big way. Also things that actually were not on the radar as much, like utility bills. You know, in a lot of places where electricity bills, take Indiana where I grew up, it was there, but it was usually not top of mind. Last time I was there, it was very much on people's minds. And a lot of that has to do with the measures that the Republicans have taken to kill or walk back clean energy projects and subsidies that make energy not just cleaner, but more affordable. So I think a real focus on what it costs to live in this country is really important. I don't think we need to walk away from our commitments to freedom and democracy as well, but we've got to tie them together. When we're talking about big issues like freedom, democracy, corruption, all of which are very much obviously in play in historic terms in this presidency, we need to talk about it in terms of what it means for you. The problem with corruption isn't just that it's wrong. It's that you wind up having agencies that aren't standing up for people who count on them. That's the problem with an unaccountable administration is that they can then appoint For example, a guy like RFK Jr., who isn't just a problem because he looks nutty, he's a problem because he just took away your ability to get a COVID shot if you're under 65 for a lot of Americans. Real things are being taken away from you that do affect your everyday well-being because of these broader things that are being taken away from all of us in terms of freedom. And the more we can connect those things together, the less we get sucked into some false choice that says that, if I take a stand on matters of fairness and justice, somehow that means I don't care about kitchen table issues like making sure you can afford your health premium or food or power bill.
There will be a time, I've heard you say this recently, there will be a time when we do have power back, and Democrats hopefully will be in 26 flipping the House at least or more, and there will be a time when things change. And I think I'm curious about how you're thinking about and how you're talking about that time that we're going to need to rebuild, because you were just talking about all of the kind of some of the damage that's being done, some of these norms that are changing, some of the, the Doge, just really reforming and remaking the government as we've known it for so long. How important is it that we start thinking about that stuff now, not just winning an election, but what we're going to do to not go backwards, but to rebuild when we have the chance?
I think it's critically important, and it's important in order to win, but it's also important in order to deserve to win and to be prepared in the event that we do win. I think it's easy to underestimate just how much we will need to build things from their very foundations. Look, one way to think about it is that our government needs to be made both less powerful in some ways and more effective and powerful in other ways. It needs to have less powers around surveillance and domination of people's ability to walk down the street in their city or express their free speech. But also, the state needs to have more capacity on things like protecting individuals from being scammed by unscrupulous businesses, the kind of thing that the CFPB was working on before they tore it down, or the kind of thing that we worked on at the U.S. Department of Transportation on everything from people being scammed by movers, which we were able to do something about, to the ways that people were sometimes being treated as airline passengers. We need to recognize that the job going forward will be very different from just taking the old status quo and patching it back together. The old status quo hasn't worked for us for a long time. I hope that it is energizing and not just daunting to recognize that, because we really are, at a moment that compares to the original New Deal in terms of the magnitude of what will have to be done next. It is really that much of a watershed moment, I think. So much has changed. And we can't expect the 1.0 version of New Deal institutions built in the 30s, 40s, and 50s to really be responding to the needs of the 2020s. So what are we going to put in their place? A different kind of Department of Education, not because we wanted to see it torn down, but because it has been. A different framework for foreign aid that really supports other countries' self-determination, but also American national interests on a new architecture. We have to, because they blew up USAID completely. Different ways of handling everything from trade to tax policy are going to be required of us. Getting it right could actually be an enormous opportunity to do good and to set Americans up for more success and freedom and well-being in our everyday lives.
And when you talk about that, I'm going to sneak a follow-up question in, Ryan. We as Democrats, people associate us with government. You're talking about the fact that rightfully people have said maybe government wasn't working, and Democrats have a harder time because it's a little bit harder to build than it is to tear things down, right? And so how do you think about kind of, as we rebuild, being cognizant and aware of restoring faith in government or trust in government? How do we do that?
I think it's all about results. And again, this is maybe my mayoral instincts coming to the surface. But what I found was that I could get a lot of trust, including the trust to maybe do something politically unpopular, based on the results that I was delivering for people in the city that I served. And of course, when I was in the cabinet, the focus of the Department of Transportation was to get people results, whether that result meant a refund that an airline owed you actually going back into your pocket or your bank account, or whether it meant a railroad crossing that was dangerous in your rural community getting replaced by an underpass, or anything else that could make you concretely better off. That's what the government is about. And I think it's important, again, as we have these very high-minded debates about the nature of freedom and the structure of our democracy, to remember that the founders didn't take the enormous risk of breaking away from a monarchy and setting up a republic just because they had some academic interest in a novel form of government. They did it because they believed correctly that humans are better off when we get to tell our government what to do instead of the other way around. That's what's really at stake here. And so I think the challenge for Democrats is not to get sucked into another superficial debate about government bigger or smaller, as if that was the only concern, but finding the places where government has become too powerful over our lives, which is definitely true in terms of this administration asserting its dominance over everything from universities to late night comedians. And at the same time, recognize where state capacity has been diminished. And it means that it is harder for Americans to get the support that they need, services that they need, on everything from help with food if you're financially vulnerable, to making sure that you're supported in having transparency with fees when you're trying to get a credit card.
Yeah.
As we reinvent these government services to get better outcomes, what do you think the role of AI and other technology will be in recreating these services, or in delivering these new services or improved services?
Well, there's certainly a big opportunity from a delivery perspective. One of the first things I saw as the potential of AI when I was serving at the Department of Transportation was the idea of automating the paperwork and actually some of the just unsexy bureaucratic stuff that consumes a huge amount of human time and energy and adds to the cost and the length of time it takes to build anything from a subway tunnel to a bridge to an airport. And I could say the same thing about energy infrastructure or housing, things we desperately need to do more of in order to make the cost of living more manageable in this country. All of that could be simplified and improved by using AI in the right way. But we have to be using it in the right way because, of course, any technology is only as good or as bad as what we tell it to do and what we enable it to do, what we allow it to do. And the challenge, of course, with AI is that it, in some cases, can be so powerful that it could get away from us. And so we need to make sure we are both using it and controlling it in the right ways. And it could well be the top policy challenge facing the next Congress and facing the next administration.
Is there a framework? Are there questions that you think policymakers should be asking when presented with opportunities to deploy AI?
Well, I think the biggest question is why. So, every technological wave gets its own momentum. I was just in San Francisco for an event, and I noticed that probably 9 out of 10 billboards between the airport and the downtown mentioned AI. And most of them were for companies that I'd never heard of, and it wasn't exactly clear to me what problems they were designed to solve. Although maybe if you're more dialed into the tech scene there, it would make more sense to you. But I know that right now there's a sort of a pressure to invoke AI on anything you're doing. And that's a way to look cool, whether you're in the policy space or whether you're a company trying to attract investors or customers. But really the question is, what is this technology helping us do? Let's take automated vehicles, probably the most important and interesting direct application of AI in the transportation space. To me, the point of automated driving isn't that it's interesting and so we should try it because we can. The point is that these could be safer than human drivers. In fact, I think in many use cases they already are. And in a country where 40,000 people die every year because of car crashes with human drivers, we could be saving thousands and thousands of lives, not to mention billions of dollars in losses and medical costs and damage and you name it, if we deploy this technology responsibly. So we should always be asking ourselves, okay, what's the biggest problem that this technology could help us solve? And then we got to ask, what's the biggest problem that this technology could create? And I think that's especially true I say this as somebody who, lived through the wave of trade and automation that came through the industrial Midwest in the 1990s and 2000s, where I grew up, and saw promises made about how the pie was going to get bigger for everybody, and watched the pie get bigger, but not everybody was better off. And the resentment and the pain and the dislocation and the damage that came from that didn't just show up in the form of empty factories with weeds pushing up through cracks in the parking lots in northern Indiana. It showed up in the form of economic populism that led, I think, directly to a president like we have today, whose message could be summarized as promising to get you a bigger slice of a smaller pie.
Mm. You've talked a lot about, we have talked a lot about, kind of, because you're talking about, because we're asking it. We've talked a lot about government, Democrats. I want to just zoom out a little bit about kind of community. This is something I know you've talked a lot about, and kind of, we've certainly delivering results, having that shared sense of purpose again is important. Are there ways you're thinking about, or maybe even working on now, in trying to figure out how to bring people together across party lines, across other divides right now that are outside government?
I think we really need to be on the lookout for experiences, mainly offline experiences, that pull people's different circles of belonging into overlapping. Because too many of our circles of belonging right now are concentric. In other words, if I know something about your professional circle and your educational background and maybe even your neighborhood, I can pretty much guess your politics. That's very dangerous. It puts us into silos where it becomes harder and harder to hear from each other. But there's so many other circles of belonging we have. It could be a neighborhood, depending where you live. It could also be a sports affiliation or a faith tradition. Or something else. And of course, the biggest circle of belonging that Americans all belong to is the American project itself. Certainly something I felt when I was deployed in the military, learning how to trust my life to people I barely knew with nothing in common but the flag on our shoulder. I think we can create a version of that that doesn't have to involve going to war, much closer to home, through some policies that are available to us. Not just policies, but norms. And one of the biggest is to build up a culture of service. One person who I got to know partly through New Deal, Josh Friday out in California, built an extraordinary track record of service on a statewide basis. In California. Of course, we have AmeriCorps at the national level, and it's something that should be getting more support, not being torn up the way it is in this administration. I proposed a version of this when I ran for president that would give everybody a chance to participate in national service and benefits if they chose to do that. Because getting together with people who are different from you and working on something hard is one of the best ways to build up the social trust that we'll need later on when we hit something divisive, whether it's a policy issue or some national disaster or anything else that threatens to pull at the fabric of this country or of our communities. And there are a lot of spaces and values like community, like patriotism, for many like faith and family, some of which have been considered as coding more conservative, but I think that anybody on our side of the aisle should be talking about just as energetically, especially if we see AI coming in and disrupting some of the patterns of belonging that we're used to that come from our professional lives. If our professional lives are about to go through more upheaval than ever, so is our sense of meaning, purpose, and belonging. And we'd better find some healthy ways to be rooted in that, or else very unhealthy forms of an answer to that, like white nationalism, to take one example, start to rear their ugly head.
Yeah, and as Californians, we're going to double click on your shout out to Josh and to Governor Newsom out here with the service, including the fact that more people are volunteering, as you probably know, in California than in the Peace Corps, and we're very proud of that, and we can expand that nationally.
You talked about things that have now been coded, like whatever it is, family values or national or patriotism, and you've pushed hard against that from as long as I've known you. Trying to take ownership back of the word freedom, for example, and what that means. How successful has the Democratic Party been at rejecting this idea that only one party gets to own these core American values?
Well, we need to continue to insist that God does not belong to a political party in the United States of America, that the flag is not the property of one political party. I think we have gotten more fluent in this in recent years. I remember not that long ago, it was kind of exotic to have national security oriented Democrats, veterans, who were running for office as Democrats. Now I see so many people who are doing really good work, who are often part of my generation of post 9/11 war veterans who are Democrats who have really challenged that. But we got more work to do to make it clear to everybody that we've got an account of patriotism that can be inclusive and can also be fiercely protective of American national security. I think similarly with faith, it's always going to be core to progressive and democratic values that people of any faith and of no faith have an equal right to belonging in this country and equal protection under our law and constitution. I think it's also okay for those of us who are guided by faith to talk about what it means to us, especially certainly something I care about, belonging to a Christian tradition that teaches that salvation has a lot to do with what you're doing to make yourself useful to those who are the least among us. To weigh that against the choices that are being made right now in Washington to cut people off from healthcare, to cut people off from food. I was hungry and you did not feed me is not a subtle piece of moral guidance from a very important faith tradition, and we need to connect those dots.
Yeah. In wrapping here, Secretary, as you are traveling the country and staying engaged, certainly, but not doing the secretary job these days, how are you balancing staying engaged, keeping informed, but still finding kind of a semblance of joy and of peace? And how do you balance this? What do your days look like in that realm these days?
Well, having twins, a son and a daughter who are now 4 years old, very much keeps Chasten and me on our toes. I don't know if balance is exactly the right word to use, but
Fair
they
enough.
Definitely, I'll put it this way, they help me balance out any risk of thinking that there's nothing more to life than politics and policy at a time like this, because they come home every day from school asking questions and excited about the world, and the whiplash of going in half an hour from trying to talk one of them out of putting a bead or a Lego up their nose to having to explain the nature of mortality. Just you never know what's coming at you from minute to minute, and it's been, I think, very healthy for me as I get reoriented for this year, when for the first time in 15 years I'm not either in office or running for office or both. This is part of how I'm really enjoying that fact of being a private citizen. But the other side of the coin is, when you're looking into the face of your child, knowing that they'll be looking right back at you later on when they're old enough to ask, saying, what exactly were you doing in the 2020s to get America out of that mess? I want to make sure I had a good answer. And that's why, even as somebody who's not on the ballot myself, I'm pounding the ground for people who are, starting with elections that are just a few days away and going into next year, and making sure that I'm traveling and speaking out in service of our values, trying to show versus tell my view of how people from our party ought to be talking about these things, and not just what we have to say and how we say it, but where we say it. Because I know that if we can do a good job in this moment, we as a generation can acquit ourselves well by the time our kids, for whom everything is on the line, are asking pointed questions about how we handled this difficult moment as a country.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Thank you for what you're doing on that front every day. I feel like we've been so grateful to be part of your journey at New Deal, and continue to be partners in lifting up the ideas and leaders around the country that are going to get us out of this mess, as you said. And so I'm just personally grateful that you've been such a great friend and partner over these many years, and looking forward to doing even more together. Ryan, I'll let you.
I continue to be so grateful for the friendships that I formed with New Deal, the space to geek out on policy solutions that were going to make people better off, and just the trust and really deep appreciation that I built with so many leaders who I don't think a week goes by that I don't talk to somebody, many of whom have gone on and run for other offices, but somebody that I got to know as a fellow public servant through this extraordinary initiative and network. So that gratitude is coming right back at you.
Thank you so much.
And I just want to add, you had a long list of accomplishments, but actually you're one of the people who created this podcast. 2018, dark days of the Trump administration. I go to New Deal conferences, be all inspired by meeting really smart elected leaders like yourself. Come home and everyone tell me there was no hope for American politics. It's all bad. And so I came to Debbie and said, we got to create a podcast so we can highlight folks like Pete Buttigieg, right? And so really grateful for the model that you laid and that you pushed us to amplify voices like yours to give us all hope for our democracy.
Well, it means a lot to hear that, and I'm glad that you continue to lift up those voices, because anybody who thinks that we don't have answers or that we don't have a good quote unquote bench, that just means they haven't seen what's going on, and I'm glad that you're creating a platform for people to see it.
No, thank you again so much for your time. It's great to see you.
Thank you.
Same here. It's a pleasure.
An Honorable Profession is a New Deal Leaders podcast. Thanks to the team at New Deal for producing this episode. We encourage you to bring honor to public service, and because we keep things honorable, no tax dollars are used in the making of this podcast.
This podcast is part of the Democracy Group.